The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest room ever built by any species. It floated at the center of Nexus Station, a massive space station that served as the heart of galactic civilization. Thousands of seats rose in great circles around a central platform, and each seat held a delegate from one of the 143 species that made up the council. Today, every seat was full. Every eye, every sensor, every sensory organ was focused on the small group of beings standing at the central platform. They were humans, and they looked so fragile compared to the massive Volanti warriors or the ancient crystalline forms of the Arzelians. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities. They were soft, short-lived creatures from a small blue world on the edge of the galaxy. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the front of the human delegation. She was a woman of 50 years, with gray hair pulled back tight and eyes that had seen too much disappointment. Behind her stood 12 other humans, all wearing the simple black uniforms of the United Terran Federation. They stood perfectly still, their faces showing no emotion at all. The chamber was buzzing with conversation. Delegates whispered to each other, wondering what the humans wanted. The humans rarely spoke at council meetings. They usually just sat quietly, listened, and voted when they were allowed to vote, which was not often. High Arbiter Thelvan floated at the head of the chamber. He was an Arzelian, a being made of living crystal that glowed with soft blue light. His species had founded the Galactic Council 10,000 years ago. They had guided the younger races, taught them to work together, and kept peace across 1,000,000 worlds. Thelvan himself was 4,000 years old, and he had seen many species come and go. He looked down at the humans with something like curiosity. In his long life, he had never paid much attention to them. They were a young species, barely 300 years into space travel. They were still on probationary status, which meant they could not vote on important matters, could not colonize certain regions of space, and had to follow special rules that full members did not. Elena Vasquez raised her hand, and the chamber slowly fell silent. "I will be brief," she said. Her voice was calm and flat. "1 week ago, this council voted on our petition for full membership. We had waited 100 years for this vote, as your rules required. We met every requirement. We passed every test. We followed every law." She paused and looked around the chamber. The vote failed. This council decided to extend our probationary period for another 100 years. The reason given was insufficient cultural maturation. We were told that humans are too young, too aggressive, too unpredictable to be trusted with full membership. Councillor Draxal of the Volanti Empire let out a loud laugh. He was a massive reptilian creature, covered in green scales, with teeth as long as human fingers. The Volanti had opposed human membership from the beginning. They said humans were dangerous, that they bred too fast, that they could not be controlled. "Perhaps the little mammals should spend another century learning manners," Draxal said. And several delegates laughed with him. Elena did not react. She simply waited for the laughter to stop. "For 300 years," she continued, "humanity has played by your rules. We accepted every restriction you placed on us. We smiled when you mocked us. We stayed silent when you cheated us in trade deals. We watched as you gave our discoveries to other species and took credit for our work. We did all of this because we believed that if we were patient, if we were good, you would eventually accept us." The chamber was completely silent now. Something in Elena's voice had changed. It was still calm, but there was a coldness underneath it that made several delegates uncomfortable. "We were wrong." Elena reached into her jacket and pulled out a small metal badge. It was her credential as ambassador to the Galactic Council. She had worn it for 20 years. The United Terran Federation formally withdraws from all treaties, agreements, and diplomatic arrangements with the Galactic Council and its member states. This withdrawal is effective immediately and without conditions. She placed a badge on the speaking platform. We came to you in peace. We asked only for fairness. You gave us neither. So we will build our own future without you. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted questions, demands, threats. Some laughed, thinking this was a joke or a bluff. Others looked worried. The Kreth Consortium delegates were already calculating the economic impact on their trading networks. High Arbiter Thelvan raised one crystalline limb, and slowly the chamber quieted. Ambassador Vasquez, he said, his voice like wind chimes in a storm, you cannot simply leave. The treaties your world signed are binding. There are procedures, negotiations, transition periods. This is not how civilized species behave. Elena looked up at him. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. It might have been anger. It might have been pity. With respect, High Arbiter, you have spent 300 years telling us we are not civilized enough to be your equals. You cannot now demand that we follow your procedures. She turned to leave, and her delegation turned with her, moving as one. This is madness. Drexal roared. Where will you go? What will you do? You need our technology, our trade routes, our protection. You are nothing without the Council. Elena stopped at the door. She did not turn around. Perhaps, she said quietly, or perhaps you have never really known what we are. The human delegation walked out of the grand chamber. The great doors closed behind them with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, the chaos began again. Delegates argued about what this meant, what should be done, whether the humans were bluffing or serious. Some called for military action. Others called for patience. A few quietly began to worry. High Arbiter Thelvan floated above it all, watching the empty platform where the human ambassador had stood. In 4,000 years, he had seen species rise and fall. He had seen wars and plagues and disasters of every kind. He had always known what to do, but now, for the first time in 3,000 years, he felt something cold and unfamiliar growing in his ancient mind. It was fear. He did not know why. The humans were weak. They were young. They had no great fleets, no ancient weapons, no powerful allies. By every measure, they were one of the least important species in the galaxy. And yet, as he remembered the look in Elena Vasquez's eyes, Thelvan could not shake the feeling that the galaxy had just changed forever. He was right. 3 months passed after the humans walked out of the grand chamber. The galaxy waited for something to happen. They waited for the humans to attack, or to threaten, or to come back begging for forgiveness. Everyone knew that small species could not survive alone. Everyone knew that the humans would have to return eventually. But the humans did nothing. Within 72 hours of Ambassador Vasquez's speech, every human in council space was gone. The embassies closed. The merchant ships flew home. The scientists packed their equipment and left their research stations. The tourists canceled their trips. Even the humans who had lived among other species for decades quietly said goodbye to their friends and returned to Terran. Space. Then the border sealed shut. Ships that approached human space were met by patrol vessels that politely but firmly turned them away. Messages sent through official channels went unanswered. Diplomats who traveled to the border were told that the Terran Federation was not accepting visitors at this time. The silence was complete. Counselor Drexal of the Volanti Empire found this very funny. He gave speeches about how the humans were hiding in fear, how they had realized their mistake, how they would come crawling back within a year. His followers laughed and agreed with him, but others were not so sure. Trade Minister Yevmora of the Kreth Consortium was one of the first to notice the problems. The Kreth were a species of small, clever beings with gray skin and large black eyes. They had built their civilization on trade, and they had made enormous profits from human goods. Human products were everywhere in council space. Their medicines were cheap and effective. Their entertainment programs were watched by billions. Their manufactured goods were simple but incredibly durable. The Kreth had been buying these products at low prices and selling them at high prices for 200 years. Now, suddenly, there were no more human products. Yevmora watched her economic reports with growing alarm. Prices for basic goods were rising across the galaxy. Hospitals were running out of certain medicines that only humans had learned to make. Young people on 100 worlds were angry that their favorite shows and music had stopped coming. It is temporary, her advisors told her. Other species will fill the gap. The market will adjust. But weeks passed, and the market did not adjust. Other species could not make human products. The humans had developed their own methods, their own technologies, their own ways of doing things. And they had never shared the secrets. Yevmora realized, with a cold feeling in her stomach, that no one had ever asked the humans how they made things so cheaply. No one had cared. The humans were a probationary species. They were not important enough to study. On the Volanti homeworld, military commanders were having a different kind of problem. Admiral Kreshto had been ordered to prepare plans for a possible invasion of human space. It should have been a simple task. The humans had only a small fleet, old ships, basic weapons. The Volanti Navy was the largest in the galaxy. But when Kreshto looked for information about human defenses, he found almost nothing. Where are the intelligence reports? He demanded. Where are the spy satellite images? Where are the assessments of their military strength? His staff looked uncomfortable. Sir, one officer said carefully, we have not conducted serious intelligence gathering on the humans for over a century. They were cooperative. They shared information freely. There seemed to be no need. Kreshto stared at his officers. You mean to tell me that we have no idea what the humans can actually do? No one answered. No one needed to. On Nexus Station, High Arbiter Thelvan sent envoy after envoy to the Terran border. Each one returned with the same message. The humans were not interested in talking. They were not angry. They were not making demands. They were simply done. This bothered Thelvan more than anything else would have. He understood anger. He understood threats and demands and negotiations. These were normal things that species did when they were upset. But this complete withdrawal, this perfect silence, was something new. He called a private meeting with the oldest and wisest members of the council. They gathered in his personal chambers, beings who had lived for thousands of years and seen the rise and fall of empires. I do not understand what the humans want, Thelvan admitted. They make no demands. They ask for nothing. What is their strategy? Old Counselor Methral, a being of pure energy who had existed since before the council was founded, spoke slowly. Perhaps they want nothing from us. Perhaps they have simply decided to live their own lives in their own way, without our involvement. Impossible, said another counselor. No species can survive alone. They need the council's technology, our trade networks, our protection from hostile powers. Do they? Methral asked. We assumed the humans were weak because they followed our rules and asked for our approval. But what if they followed our rules because they chose to? What if they were never as weak as we thought? The chamber fell silent. Thelvan thought about this for a long time. He thought about how the humans had always been polite, always cooperative, always willing to wait and work within the system. He had assumed this was because they had no choice. He had assumed they needed the council. But what if he had been wrong? What if the humans had been patient because they were kind, not because they were weak? What if they had followed the rules because they believed in fairness, not because they feared punishment? And what if, Now that they had given up on the council, they no longer needed to be patient. 6 months after the withdrawal, the first reports came in from the border regions. Human ships had been seen in the forbidden zones, the areas of space the probationary species were not allowed to enter. These zones were rich in resources, and the major powers had been saving them for themselves. The humans were not waiting anymore. Thelvan received the reports in silence. He thought about the young species he had dismissed for 3 centuries. He thought about the look in Ambassador Vasquez's eyes when she placed her badge on the platform for the first time in his long life. The High Arbiter of the Galactic Council began to wonder if his civilization had made a terrible mistake. And far away, beyond the sealed border, humanity was building something new. 14 months after the humans left the council, a small ship approached the Terran border. It was old and damaged, held together with patches and hope. Inside were 47 beings of the Mallory species, insectoid creatures with delicate wings and compound eyes that saw beauty in everything. The Mallory had been a probationary species for 6,000 years. Every century, they petitioned for full membership. Every century, they were told they were not ready. Their crime was simple. They were peaceful. They had no weapons, no military, no desire to fight. The Council considered this a weakness. Now they were running. The Volanti Empire had decided to protect Mallory space. This was what they called it when they moved their warships into another species' territory and began taking what they wanted. The Council did nothing. The Council never did anything when one of the major powers decided to expand. The Mallory ship sent a message to the Terran Border Patrol. They asked for asylum. They expected to be turned away. Every other border they had tried had refused them. Admiral James Okonkwo received the message on his flagship. He was a tall man with dark skin and gray hair, a career military officer who had spent his life protecting Terran space. He read the Mallory petition slowly, then read it again. His grandmother had told him stories when he was young. Stories about Earth's history, about walls and borders, and people turned away because they were the wrong color or came from the wrong place. She had told him about boats full of refugees that no one would help. She had told him about the shame of nations that closed their doors to the desperate. "Let them in," Admiral Okonkwo ordered. "All of them. And send the message to command. We need to prepare for more." The Mallory were the first. They were not the last. Within weeks, other ships began arriving. The Keth came next, silicon-based beings who thought differently from carbon life forms. The Council had always considered them too alien to be trusted. They had spent millennia isolated, ignored, treated as curiosities rather than people. Then came the Durrani, refugees from a world the Volanti had conquered 3 centuries ago. They had lived under occupation for generations, their culture suppressed, their history erased. Now they escaped in stolen ships, carrying nothing but their memories and their hope. More species followed. The Ven, who saw the future in dreams and had been called dangerous for their abilities. The Kreth outcasts, who had opposed their consortium's exploitation and been exiled for their principles. The young species, the strange species, the species that the Council had decided were not worthy of respect. They came to human space because they had nowhere else to go. Chancellor Amara Usse of the United Terran Federation faced a difficult choice. Her government had left the Council to build their own future, to be free from the judgment of ancient powers who did not understand them. Taking in refugees meant taking responsibility for them. It meant sharing resources. It meant possible conflict with the Council, but it also meant something else. Amara had studied Earth's history. She knew the darkness that her species was capable of, the times when humans had been the ones building walls and turning away the desperate. She also knew the light, the moments when humans chose compassion over fear, generosity over greed. She addressed her government in a simple speech. We left the council because they would not treat us as equals. If we now refuse to help others who are in the same situation, what have we really learned? What kind of civilization are we building? The vote was not close. The Terran Federation opened its borders. The newcomers did not come empty-handed. The Mallory brought their knowledge of stellar engineering, techniques for harvesting energy from stars that made human technology look primitive. The Keth shared their understanding of mineral processing, methods that could extract resources from asteroids faster and cleaner than anything carbon-based species had developed. The Durrani brought their libraries, thousands of years of history and philosophy that had survived conquest and oppression. Each species brought something unique. Each species had been dismissed by the Council as unimportant, but together they created something powerful. The Terran Accord was born. It was not an empire. Humans did not rule it. Instead, it was a partnership, a coalition of equals who agreed to work together while respecting each other's differences. The Mallory built orbital habitats that could house billions. The Keth mined the asteroid belts and produced materials for construction. The Durrani taught the others about history and philosophy, helping them understand the mistakes of the past. Humans contributed their strange gift for organization, their ability to bring different people together and make them work toward common goals. It was not magic. It was just a skill they had learned over thousands of years of living on a small, crowded planet where cooperation was the only way to survive. Within a year, the Terran Accord included 37 species. Within 2 years, it controlled more territory than the Volanthi Empire. On Nexus Station, the Galactic Council watched in disbelief. The smaller species were leaving one by one. Some fled to the Accord. Others simply stopped attending council meetings, stopped paying tribute, stopped pretending that the old system worked. The great powers tried to respond. The Volanthi threatened military action. The Kreth Consortium tried economic pressure. The Arzelians sent diplomatic missions, offering compromises and negotiations. Nothing worked. High Arbiter Thelvan understood finally what was happening. The Council had built its power on the belief that younger species needed older species to guide them. They had convinced everyone, including themselves, that this was true. But the humans had proven it was not. If one young species could build a civilization without the Council, then so could others. If one group of rejected and dismissed peoples could work together as equals, then the whole system of control and guidance was a lie. The humans had not just left the Council. They had shown everyone that leaving was possible. Thelvan looked out at the stars and made a decision that had never been made in 10,000 years of Council history. He would go to the humans himself. He would ask them for help. It was the only option left. 8 months after the humans left, the Galactic Council held an emergency meeting. This time, there was no laughter. There were no jokes about weak mammals or foolish children. The delegates sat in tense silence as Intelligence Director Yev Mora of the Kreth Consortium walked to the central platform. Yev Mora had spent months gathering every piece of information she could find about humanity. She had interviewed traders who had worked with humans. She had studied old records. She had sent spy drones to the edge of Terran space, though most of them never returned. What she had found changed everything. "We were wrong," she began. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "We were wrong about almost everything." She activated a holographic display. It showed a human starship, the kind that Council records said was their most advanced design. It was a simple vessel, powered by fusion reactors capable of traveling at standard faster than light speeds. Nothing special. Nothing threatening. "This is what the humans showed us," Yevmora said. "This is what we put in our databases. This is what we believed they could build." She changed the image. A new ship appeared, sleek and strange, with lines that seemed to bend in ways that hurt the eyes. This is what they actually have. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. The ship on the display did not match anything in Council records. Its design was unlike anything any species had ever built. We captured this image 3 weeks ago, at the edge of the Forbidden Zones. Our best scientists have studied it. They cannot identify the power source. They cannot explain how it moves. They estimate it is at least 5 times faster than our fastest warships. Counselor Drexel stood up, his scales flushed dark with anger. This is impossible. The humans are a young species. They cannot have technology more advanced than ours. You must be mistaken. Yevmora looked at him calmly. I wish I were, Counselor. But there is more. She showed more images. Human colonies on worlds that should have taken centuries to develop, already thriving with millions of inhabitants. Stations orbiting gas giants, harvesting fuel at rates that dwarfed Council mining operations. Ships moving in formations so precise that Council military experts could not understand how they coordinated. We always assumed the humans were struggling to keep up with us, Yevmora said. We saw their small fleet, their simple technology, their quiet diplomats, and we thought they were weak. We were wrong. They were not struggling. They were holding back. The chamber was completely silent now. The humans followed our rules because they chose to. They showed us only what they wanted us to see. They kept their true capabilities hidden, not because they were planning to attack us, but because they wanted to earn our trust honestly. They wanted to be accepted for who they were, not feared for what they could do. She paused, and her voice became very quiet. And we rejected them anyway. High Arbiter Thelvan floated forward. Why would they hide their strength? If they had this technology, why not use it to demand full membership? Because that is not who they are, Yevmora replied. Humans are strange, High Arbiter. They believe in earning things. They believe in fairness. They wanted to prove themselves worthy by our standards, not force us to accept them. They thought that if they were patient and good, we would eventually see their value. She looked around the chamber at the assembled delegates. We taught them that patience was foolish. We taught them that following the rules meant nothing. We taught them that the only thing the Council respects is power. So now they have stopped hiding. And now we see what they really are. The images on the display changed again, showing a map of known space. Terran territory was marked in blue. It had grown. Where once the humans controlled a small corner of the galaxy, they now spread across vast regions. The Forbidden Zones, the resource-rich areas that the major powers had reserved for themselves, were filling with blue. They are not building an empire, Yevmora said. They are building a civilization, parallel to ours, independent of ours. They have enough resources, enough space, enough capability to never need us again. Drexel slammed his fist on his seat. Then we attack now, before they grow stronger. The Volanthe fleet will crush them before they become a real threat. And if we do? Yevmora asked. If we attack without provocation, a species that has done nothing but leave peacefully, what message do we send? What will the other probationary species think? What will our own citizens think? She pointed to the chamber walls, where images of the debates were broadcast across the galaxy. Billions are watching right now. They are asking themselves if the Council attacks everyone who refuses to be controlled. They are wondering if their own species is safe. Do you want them to have that answer, Counselor? Drexel sat down slowly, his anger replaced by something that looked almost like fear. Thelvan spoke again. What do you recommend, Director? Yevmora was quiet for a moment. I do not know, High Arbiter. For 10,000 years, the Council has operated on a simple principle. Younger species need guidance from older species. We believed we knew what was best. We believed we were protecting them from themselves. She turned off the display. But what if we were wrong? What if some species do not need our guidance? What if some species are capable of finding their own way, making their own choices, building their own futures? What if the humans are showing us something we forgot long ago, that the universe is big enough for everyone to be free? No one had an answer. The meeting ended without a decision. The delegates returned to their homeworlds, carrying with them the knowledge that everything they believed about humanity, about the Council, about their place in the galaxy, was wrong. And in the vastness of space, the human civilization continued to grow. Not with armies and conquest, but with hope and hard work and the stubborn belief that a better future was possible. The galaxy was changing, and the old powers could only watch. The human capital world was called Nova Geneva. It was a beautiful planet, covered in green forests and blue oceans, with cities that seemed to grow naturally from the landscape rather than conquering it. High Arbiter Thelvan had never seen anything like it. He had traveled across the galaxy for 4,000 years. He had visited the crystal towers of his homeworld, the vast machine cities of the Kreth, the fortress continents of the Volanthi. He had seen wonders that most beings could not imagine. But Nova Geneva made him feel something he had not felt in millennia. Small dot, it was not the buildings or the technology. It was the people. Humans walked through the streets alongside Nalori and Keth and Durrani and dozens of other species. They talked and laughed and argued and worked together. Children of different species played in parks while their parents watched from benches, sharing food and conversation. It was chaos, beautiful chaos, the kind of mess that came from letting people be free. The Council would never have allowed this. Different species were supposed to stay in their own areas, follow their own customs, maintain their own hierarchies. Mixing was dangerous. Mixing led to unpredictable results, but the humans did not seem to care about predictability. Chancellor Amara Essay received Thelvan in her office. It was a simple room, much smaller than any chamber on Nexus Station. There were windows that looked out on a garden, and the walls were covered with pictures of people and places that Thelvan did not recognize. Family, he realized. She had decorated her office with images of her family. Amara was a woman in her 60s, with dark skin and silver hair, and eyes that seemed to see everything. She did not bow or show formal respect. She simply offered him a chair and asked if he would like tea. "It is an Earth custom," she explained. "We offer hot drinks to guests as a sign of welcome." Thelvan accepted the tea. It was warm and bitter and strangely comforting. "I have come to ask for your help," he said. He had rehearsed formal speeches, diplomatic phrases, careful language. But sitting in this simple room, facing this calm woman, he found that he could not use them. He could only speak the truth. The Council is failing. Species are leaving. The economy is collapsing. The old alliances are breaking apart. Everything my people built over 10,000 years is falling to pieces. Amara listened without interrupting. "I do not understand what happened," Thelvan continued. "We believed we were guiding the younger species. We believed we were protecting them. We believed we knew what was best." "You believed you were special," Amara said gently. "You believed that because you were old, you were wise. You believed that because you had power, you had the right to use it." "Yes," Thelvan admitted. "We believed all of those things. Were we wrong?" Amara was quiet for a long moment. She looked out the window at the garden, where flowers from 100 different worlds grew together in beautiful confusion. "On Earth," she said finally, "we have a long and terrible history. We divided ourselves by the color of our skin, by the place we were born, by the gods we worshipped. We built walls. We created hierarchies. We told ourselves that some people were better than others, that some people deserved freedom and others did not." She turned back to face him. "It took us thousands of years to learn that we were wrong. And we are still learning. We still make mistakes. We still hurt each other. But we discovered something important along the way. No one is wise enough to decide another person's future. No one is good enough to control another person's life. Then how do you make decisions? Thelvan asked. How do you maintain order? How do you prevent chaos? We do not prevent chaos, Amara said with a small smile. We embrace it. We let people be messy and complicated and free. We build systems that help people work together, but we do not force them. We create spaces for cooperation, but we do not demand it. She set down her teacup. The council tried to control the galaxy. You created rules and hierarchies and systems of approval. You decided who was ready for freedom and who was not. And it worked for a while. But control always fails eventually. People always find ways to be free. Thelvan thought about this. He thought about the thousands of species his people had guided over the millennia. He thought about the ones who had been kept at probationary status forever, the ones whose potential had been crushed by rules they had no voice in creating. What do you want? He asked. You have built something powerful here. You could use it to destroy the council. You could make yourself the rulers of the galaxy. We do not want to rule anyone, Amara said. We never did. We only wanted to be treated as equals. We only wanted a fair chance. She stood and walked to the window. The council can still survive. It can even thrive. But it has to change. No more probationary species. No more hierarchies based on age or power. Every species gets a voice. Every species gets a vote. Every species is treated with dignity. That is a very different council than the one I have led, Thelvan said slowly. Yes, Amara agreed. It would require you to give up power. It would require you to trust species you have always controlled. It would require you to admit that you were wrong. She turned to face him again. Can you do that, High Arbiter? Can your people do that? Thelvan was silent for a long time. He thought about his 4,000 years of life. He thought about all the decisions he had made, all the species he had judged, all the times he had believed he knew best. He thought about how comfortable certainty was, and how frightening it was to admit that you might be wrong. Then he thought about the streets of Nova Geneva. He thought about the children playing together. He thought about the chaos and the beauty and the freedom. I do not know if we can change, he said honestly. We are old. We are set in our ways. Change is difficult for us. It is difficult for everyone, Amara said. But it is possible. We are proof of that. She extended her hand toward him. It was another human custom, he knew. A gesture of peace between equals. Work with us, she said. Not as rulers guiding children, but as partners building something new. Let us show you that a different way is possible. Thelvan looked at her hand. He thought about 10,000 years of history. He thought about all the things his people had built, and all the things they had destroyed. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached out and took her hand. Teach us, he said. How to change. How to be partners instead of masters. How to be equal. Amara Ashe smiled. It was a warm smile, full of hope and patience, and something that Thelvan's ancient mind struggled to identify. Forgiveness, he realized. It was forgiveness. That is all we ever wanted to hear, she said. 1 year later, the new Galactic Compact was signed. It was not perfect. Nothing built by living beings ever is. There were arguments and disagreements and painful compromises. Old hatreds did not vanish overnight. New problems arose that no one had predicted. But for the first time in galactic history, every species stood as equals. For the first time, no one was told they were not ready for freedom. For the first time, the future was written not by the powerful, but by everyone together and humanity. The young species that had once begged for acceptance finally found their place among the stars. Not as conquerors, not as rulers, not as the most powerful or the most advanced dot, just as good neighbors thought it was enough. It was more than enough dot. It was everything they had ever wanted.